This podcast is made possible by NetSuite by Oracle.
Hello, this is Paul Barber. I'm the CEO of Prophix Software, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leader podcast.
This is episode 801.
You can't be the person that's sitting on the sidelines saying, hey, there's a problem over there. Now you're the VP of that department. Go ahead, solve it. I've pointed it out. That's my job. That's not enough anymore. You have to be able to really dig into the numbers in a lot more details. So to me, it's about breaking down those silos, identifying problems across the organization, getting your hands dirty, and leading the team to resolution. But yeah, that hit me over probably a month or two, and it's completely transformed the way I have to operate day to day. It changes the way I look at things. It changes the way I talk to other people in the organization and outside the organization.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Ryan Van Hatten, CFO of Prophix. Hello. This episode, we do, in fact, interview Prophix CFO Ryan Van Hatten. However, instead of my traditional preface, I thought I'd use this space to provide some background regarding our interview with Ryan Van Hatten, who, as you'll learn, joined Prophix 17 years ago and would acquire the skills to become a CFO along the way. Now, Prophix was a small company when Ryan joined, and it's a mid-sized company today. But it's no PepsiCo with multiple tracks dedicated to developing finance executives. Still, Ryan Van Hatten had an advantage that executives inside similarly sized venture-backed firms or even PepsiCo executives don't have. And that's Prophix was founder-led. Now, alert listeners may have noticed that we began this episode with the voice of Paul Barber, who was in fact Prophix's founder. Sadly, Paul died earlier this month after battling cancer, and I only learned that during this interview with Ryan. Meanwhile, I had recorded that clip with Paul after interviewing him several years ago for another podcast where I interview CEOs. We have included a short portion of that interview on this episode, immediately following our talk with Ryan. Now, the big takeaway here for me is that Paul Barber founded a company and created an environment that incubated C-suite executives. Because Prophix not only developed its CFO internally, it developed its CEO, Alok Ajmera, internally. Alok, in fact, joins Prophix the year before Ryan Van Hatten did. Our talk with CFO Ryan Van Hatten begins after this. This is it, the putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours. But on your backswing, your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? Poor visibility, because you're still relying on spreadsheets and outdated finance software. To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. Over 28,000 businesses already use NetSuite. For the new year, NetSuite has a new financing program for those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/CFOpod. Head to netsuite.com/CFOpod for this special one-of-a-kind financing offer on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. netsuite.com/CFOpod. Hello, we're speaking with Ryan Van Hatten, CFO of Prophix. Ryan, welcome.
Thanks very much, Jack. Good to be here.
Ryan, we're going to ask you to look back, and what we want are a few of those experiences that you feel prepared you to be a finance leader? What would come to mind for you?
Yeah, Jack, let me just start by saying right up front, my path to becoming a CFO has not been traditional in any sense of the word. In fact, my first job in finance or accounting was as the CFO of Prophix. I didn't have any jobs in public or private accounting leading up to this. It was always jobs on the operational side of the business. So just to tell that story a little bit and talk about those experiences, I'll go back. I was doing my MBA in 2005, finishing in 2005. And if I think back, pretty much everyone in the class was going into investment banking. It was the way to go. That was the way to make some money and get really up there in the world. I didn't think it sounded very fun. It was just poring over spreadsheets all day, really tedious, long hours. Didn't like it, didn't want to do it. I had in my head that consulting, that was the way to go. I thought I knew everything at that stage in my life. I was going to be a consultant and go out and help lots of different companies. So what I did was I started looking online for consulting jobs, just random jobs. And I found this company, Prophix, where I am today. And this was, back in 2005, so it's 17 years ago or so. And I got an interview for this job as a consultant. I didn't know what it would be. I came in on day one, not really knowing too much about it. I figured I'd be a management consultant. I'd tell people what to do. In hindsight, that was a terrible idea. I wasn't at the point in my career where I could tell anyone anything about anything. I didn't have enough experience. I couldn't do what I thought I was capable of doing. Luckily for me, that wasn't really the job. It was more of an implementation job. So implementing the Prophix software for our customers. Back then, I know it doesn't seem like that long ago, but our product was very different. It was a completely different product, completely different companies that we were focused on. So our implementations at that point were kind of 2-week implementations, almost always on site with the customer. So my entire life for the 4 or 5 years I was doing that job was flying around North America, meeting a new CFO or a new controller, whoever I was working with, learning about their business, implementing Prophix very quickly, in and out, nice and fast. That was a great experience. I got to see over those 4 or so years about 100 different companies across different industries, different regions, and how their Office of Finance actually operated. What was on the minds of those CFOs? What problems were they facing? So I spent a lot of time kind of learning and trying to figure that out. But as you can imagine, with a role being on the road, I'm not sure if you've had a role like that before, but I started to get sick of it. I got to the point where I was coming back into Toronto in the customs line. I actually had a time where the customs agent said, "Where are you coming from?" And I couldn't answer the question. I didn't actually remember where I was, and I had to stop for a minute or 30 seconds and say, okay, I was Pittsburgh. I was coming from Pittsburgh. But it got to that point, and I just had to stop. I was sick of it. It was a great learning experience, but it was enough. So I stepped into kind of a management role within the services group at Prophix. I didn't want to leave. I loved Prophix. I loved the people in the company. So I stepped into a different role. So that was one experience. The second one I want to call upon is also obviously at Prophix, but now fast forward a few more years down the road. This is around 2012, 2013. Prophix was in more than ever before some turmoil. We had actually had a down year for the first year in forever for the company. And my boss in services was moving into a role to replace our COO, who was let go at the time. My boss, Alok is his name, he said, "Hey, Ryan, you've been really successful in services for a long time. It's been great. Why don't you come down to sales? Sales is a big mess at Prophix right now. Why don't you come into sales operations, start creating a department there, setting some structures, some operational processes, putting them in place?" I said, "No, there's no freaking way I'm going to do that. I don't know anything about sales. My whole career has been in services. In services, as you probably know, sales is the bad guy. You don't like sales. You don't want to work with those sales guys. They're selling stuff that we could never implement and never deal with." I didn't want anything to do with that. However, as I am apt to do, I was open and I had conversations. I talked to a lot of people about it, and my boss Alok convinced me to, "Hey, let's try this. Let's see if it can work." So I took that role. I spent a few years there in kind of sales operations, getting more senior and more broad in my experience. So although it started as a sales operations role, it really became a corporate operations role. I was working closely with sales, marketing, still with the services group that I had left behind. I probably had exposure to everything except for kind of the R&D and development shop of the company, which is obviously an important part of the company, but definitely not one that they wanted me touching or having anything to do with. That was their own thing.
Can I ask just regarding this chapter that you're relating now? That was also during the evolution, I would imagine, of Prophix's business model to the to
Exactly.
SaaS from the on-premise. I mean, is that in part what you were sort of parachuted in there to help the sales organization and understand the nuances of selling a SaaS solution versus the on-premise world?
Yeah, absolutely. We were at that time when I first made the move, we were probably just about developing our SaaS solution, so starting to bring it to reality and to fruition. I don't think we actually started selling it until 2016. So it was a few years into that for sure, but it was really preparing the organization for the scale that was going to come. It was a massive shift for the organization. Anyone that's been through a transition like that, from an old perpetual on premise software company to a now SaaS cloud based company, will tell you it involves changing every part of the business. It's not just as simple as let's throw this new product out there, see how it goes. You actually have to spend a lot of time considering operationally how is it going to affect your business, and that's the kind of stuff I was putting in place to make sure we were prepared for that. And it was a great experience. There's no better way to learn about a company than getting knee deep into the operations of the company. And any good CFO, I would say, has to understand those operations in detail to be successful.
At this place in time, you're not yet thinking of yourself as a finance executive, or are you?
No,
You're nodding your head.
I wasn't thinking about it in any way, actually. You're totally right. I was saying, hey, this is great. I thought I would be in services forever. Now I'm in operations. I love it. I'm going to be the COO. That's the path that I'm going to try and follow. And it's going to be great. And of course, they're going to give me that job. Never really considered finance. But the lesson I had learned with taking that role was really don't be afraid to take chances in your career, especially when you were young. At that point in my career, I was a little bit younger than today. Maybe I'm still young now, potentially. But take those chances and really roll the dice, especially when you have a spot that is safe, like Prophix was for me. I'd been around the company for a long time. I knew the people. I knew there was no real risk. If I fell flat on my face, they would be there to help me and to pick me up. It wouldn't just be like, well, thanks for trying. And so that lesson eventually, and this wasn't one of the experiences I was gonna talk about, but that's what led me into the finance role eventually as well. Where in 2016, again, we had a bit of a transition as a company. The CFO of Prophix was let go at the time, and I was asked to come in and fill the role temporarily. I knew all the people on that team; they knew me, and we respected each other. So it was more of a, hey, let's come in, calm the troops down, assess where we're at. We'll go out and find a new CFO. It'll take a few months or whatever it was going to be, and you'll fill that role, and then you'll come back. You have your home in operations, and it's all good. And obviously now 6 years on, still here, so it became permanent.
You already, though, had a real sense of, I have to believe, like resource allocation, budgeting. You're
Yeah,
aware where money is being spent in the company. I mean, given your background and what you shared with
good.
us, I have a sense that you knew how this company operated financially.
Yeah, I think I understood the depths of the operations and the impact that that had on the finances as well. I think through my years being exposed to people in the office of finance, I had become relatively astute at understanding the finances of a company, really digging into the deep layers of it to get to the root of issues. And I think I really did have a really strong understanding of that, which is certainly why Alok, who was our CEO at the time, he had been moving up as well. It's why he kind of tapped me for that role and said, "Hey, you clearly understand the business. We need somebody in that role that knows things, can be a calming force, and probably can change some of the processes around as well." So that's what I did.
Just want to repeat or highlight really that as you explained, it was Alok, who's now CEO, who was on the sales team, who originally reached out to you so many years ago to, as you explained to us, to take on this role that you were somewhat uncertain
Right.
about. And one imagines that likewise, as you advanced into more senior roles related to finance, he might have been pointing the direction as well, or no, or
Absolutely.
was he a mentor to you? How does it work?
Yeah.
And this, of course, is what many people would consider a founder-led company originally. Founder-led, or is that a characterization?
Yeah. 100%.
Paul Barber, of course, who was been an entrepreneur in the space for some time, and I would imagine I would call it sort of a passing of the torch to that next generation and next stage of growth for the company. How am I doing? Am I close to the
You're
Prophix story,
Yeah,
or
you're spot on for sure. Yeah, Paul founded the company back in the late '80s. In fact, this was something I was going to touch on a bit later in the interview, for sure. But yeah, he founded the company. It was founder led, and always had been founder led right up until last year. In fact, which is part of what I want to discuss a bit later. But Alok, back to him. 100%. He's been my mentor for this entire time. And that was really the experience that I wanted to share. It was, anyone can tell you have a mentor, have a big network of mentors out there that you can rely on. Having somebody like him and having the open relationship, the openness and the willingness for both of us to learn from each other has been just incredibly helpful. I like to think both ways over the years. 100%.
well, let's we do have a few more career related questions we'll likely want to ask
Sure.
you. But let's right now find out about Prophix, this company that you grew your career up with. What is this company, whatever its offerings about today? What is it about today?
Yeah.
Prophix, tell
Yeah.
us.
So Prophix is what's known as a corporate performance management tool, or a CPM tool. It's not really a term that's super prevalent still out there in the marketplace. A lot of CFOs, I think, if you polled them, they wouldn't just click in right away and say, CPM, I know exactly what that is. At its core, CPM is designed to make life easier for the Office of Finance. We do that through being an extension of your ERP. So primarily, we're looking at doing planning, reporting, all of those things that we use Excel for. All of us use Excel for in our day-to-day lives or in our corporate lives. Oftentimes, what you'll find with Excel is you run out of runway with it. It's not a good tool at scale. It's good for small companies for sure. It's very flexible. It's easy to use, and there's good things about that. It lacks the structure, though, that you need really to do planning and reporting and FP&A in general at scale. So Prophix is in that CPM space. Our goal really as a company is to change the way that people work in the Office of Finance. We look at that world of analysts and directors of FP&A slogging away every single month, buried in spreadsheets, working at month ends until midnight every night just to make sure the board gets the report or the CFO gets the report. And it's not a world we want to stay in. We want to be able to modernize that and make it better. And solutions like ours and other CPM solutions, that's what we do. That's our main goal.
This ought to be fun then. We want to we want to know about your lines of sight. We want to understand better how, especially when you stepped into the role,
Yeah.
whether you felt you had all the visibility you need to supply what you needed to supply to the board and investors. Tell us about those KPIs that you're paying close attention to understand how Prophix is performing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the answer to the first part of your question is no. I don't think I had all that visibility to start with. It's interesting, as a company that's in that CPM space, you would automatically assume, it's their product. They must be doing great. Everything is perfect on the FP&A side. That wasn't the case. The finance organization was in a bit of turmoil, and it wasn't the case at all. We didn't have good insight on our numbers. In a lot of cases, we didn't know what the numbers were. I remember being in executive meetings before I was in finance, and we would pop up a P&L on the screen, and the entire debate was, well, is this right? There was no analysis or discussion. It was just, is that number actually going to be correct? Which obviously is not the place that you want to be in as a company. So we definitely had to make some changes to the team. I was brought into the role in finance temporarily, so I didn't want to start making those changes right away. Really, my mandate was to assess, see where we're at, see what needs to be done, see what needs to be changed, and then to start to reorganize things and make those changes. And that's what we did eventually. And that allowed us to focus more on what's really critical to the business. So you asked about the metrics in particular. Those are ever evolving. I would say, especially today, it's obviously a very kind of unique macro environment out there today, not just with COVID. There's the great resignation, things you've heard about before. Inflation is crazy right now. There's war going on in some parts of the world. It's a nutty world out there. And I find that you have to have a much better understanding of your data, not just financial data, but operational data as well. And that's really a journey that Prophix has been on, to become more data driven in the way we operate our business. In the past, as a founder led company, it's all well and good to kind of talk about decisions anecdotally and just say, well, this is how I feel today. This is what I'm kind of seeing out there. And let's make a decision and go with it. And yeah, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not. And if it's not, well, it's okay. We'll move forward. We'll keep the ball moving forward. That's not enough anymore. You really need to be more data driven in the way you're making decisions, which requires you to have an entire team of people that is working on data, just making sure that you have the right data, that it's clean, that it's presented in a way that's actually usable for people. And that's something we've actually just started in the last year, is creating a data team at Prophix. We could talk about that another time.
Wondering, well, who's on that team? Are these data scientists? Are they FP&A folks? Are they so a blend of finance and BI and data people? How am I doing? Close?
Yeah. In fact, it's so preliminary. It's right now, to be honest with you, it's a team of one. We have the leader for the group, who's a hands-on type of guy, and he's going to get a lot of things done for us. But that's the stage we're at now, is now building out. We have a basic platform in place that we've been using and it's working. Now let's start building up the team around it so we can expand that platform to work with more people internally in the company.
As you talk about metrics and data, we think of non-financial metrics, things that you're measuring, the data is revealing about your customers, perhaps. The sales funnel, as you look into the sales funnel, the data that's collected about, the rate customers are either upgrading or not upgrading. All of these things kind of inform the business model and the finance model. Wondering if there's a business dynamic that you can share with us that
Sure.
you've been keeping a close eye on, or maybe this individual you mentioned, you put it on his list, towards the top of his list, saying or her list, we need to get, we need to understand what's happening.
Yeah,
anything like
for
that?
sure. The biggest things that we're focused on as a business are growth, for sure, and then efficiency as well. And it's not really as simple as looking at your financial statements and saying, well, growth means your revenue is growing and efficiency means your profitability is growing. We look at it in a slightly different way. For a software company and a cloud company, it's not unusual to look at things a little bit differently. So the way that we kind of track our growth, at least, is in terms of ACV, or annualized contract value, maybe known as ARR, or annually recurring revenue for different companies. But essentially what that's measuring is, how much recurring revenue do we have in the bank that we can count on every year? And that's basically the crux of the SaaS business model. And the reason that it's great is you go into a year knowing already, hey, I don't have to sell all of this again. It's all sold. It's out there. People are using it. So we focus on ACV and the growth on that. It's one of the key metrics that we look at. Besides the amount of new ACV that we're selling, then the other key half to that is how well are we retaining those customers? It's pretty expensive to go out there and find a new customer when you consider all the marketing costs that go into it, allocating all the sales costs and other things. it's actually way more efficient and way cheaper to keep a customer and to sell to that customer potentially. So a couple of the key metrics we measure there are retention focused, one being the gross retention, which, in its most simple form is you go into a year with $100 million of ACV or ARR. How much do you come out with from that base? Do you come out with 93 million, 90 million, 50 million? That percentage is your retention rate, your gross retention rate. So in our case, for Prophix, just to share some of the details, we have a really good retention rate. It's really high. It's up around 93% for us. And that's something we focus on very closely. The other part of retention is your net retention. This one is a little more complicated, but it's measuring now how much are you losing through that churn that happens versus how much are you selling into your customer base. And what that really tells you is, hey, over time, if I sell nothing else, my ACV is going to continue to grow or it's going to decline. So the goal of any SaaS company is to be above 100%. You want to just keep that number growing no matter what else is going on in the world, no matter what else is going on with sales. It's a critical metric for us. We measure it meticulously and we break it down in a lot of different ways. And positive news for us, it's actually at 108% right now. So that implies when we can have an 8% growth rate on our recurring revenue, even if we sell nothing else. So that's how we look at growth. If you think about the efficiency side of things, yes, margins and profitability, EBITDA, are important to us. We look at a few other kind of unique metrics that are kind of SaaS specific, I would say. One of them is we look at our lifetime value of a customer. So that is basically taking a look at how much profitability will that one customer generate for you over time, over their useful life as a customer, which is based on the churn rate. And how does that compare to the acquisition cost, the cost of acquiring that customer? So getting into those kind of unit economics, you find a ratio between those two things and basically a payback period. How long does it take to get the investment back that you've invested into getting the customer? And we measure that one very meticulously. It's a very important efficiency metric for us. There's something else out there with a catchy name called the magic number that a lot of people focus on as well. That's basically saying in the most simplistic terms, how much sales and marketing expense am I expending to bring on the new ACV or the new recurring revenue that I'm looking at today? And you want that number to be as close to 1 as you can get it. Ideally, for every dollar you're investing, you're generating $1 of new revenue. Not always the case, very difficult to get to a number like that, of course, but that's the goal that people kind of point to generally. One of the key things that we're actually talking about right now, totally in line with everything we just discussed, is, okay, now let's take a look at our long-term plans and say, we're looking at, we want to get to this ACV target. We have a target of whatever X number of ACV by 2025. We can now say, using some of those metrics I just talked about, what is it going to take to get there? And is it practical? And what I mean by that is, hey, let's look at our acquisition cost, our average size per customer. If that results in, let's say, 2,000 customers that have to be added, and we look at our acquisition cost and say, well, it's 100,000 per customer, are we going to be willing to spend that much money on sales and marketing in the next 3 to 4 years to get there? And the answer is, heck no, we can't afford to do that. That would destroy our profitability. But that guides us as a business. Now we can say, well, we have to acquire those companies. We have to get to our goal. How can we do that? Can we increase the amount that we're charging those customers? Maybe. Can we acquire them more efficiently? Almost definitely. That's where we see a lot of room to grow. And I think where a lot of companies can probably improve. And I would also make the leap and extension that the CFO at your company is probably the person to really spend the time thinking through problems like that and helping find solutions for them as well.
Some great takeaways there for us. Thank you. We did want to touch on talent with you, just given you mentioned the Great Resignation, of course. Curious as to how your mindset in this current environment is when it relates to talent and being a finance leader, spending more time perhaps with your chief people officer or HR leader. What would you share with us? What are your concerns? What are you looking at to remedy or help shore up the workforce?
Yeah, it's a major concern. It's a huge part of our kind of executive level discussions today. Without people at a software company in particular, we're nothing. We're a piece of code sitting out there, and that's not going to be very helpful to anyone. So we definitely focus on it a lot. We track our kind of employee sentiment very, very closely. It's something that's always been, I would say, incredibly important to the business, is how are our employees feeling on a day-to-day basis. We survey them relentlessly, let's say, every quarter at least. We're asking them questions about how they're feeling. And the results are always good. We have really high employee satisfaction, really high employee NPS, if that's the metric you're using. And in the end, really high employee retention as well. So in a world today where companies are experiencing, 10, 20, 25% churn rates on their staff, we've actually kept ours very low, into the single digits, in fact, because we've bred such a good culture over time. And we've done that in a lot of different ways. I think we have a lot of interesting programs in place that keep people engaged. One of them is, hey, we have a focus on work-life balance. Every company says that, and you can give people vacation time and do things that are basic like that to meet those needs. We saw a problem with it, though. We said, hey, with vacation time, we were always getting people coming back and saying, oh yeah, I was on vacation. It was great, but I had to respond to these emails, or I had to take this call because life goes on, business goes on. So we came up with this concept of team time off. Let's shut down an entire department for an entire week. And that way, you're not going to have to be online. Everyone's offline, and it's well understood across the organization. So that's something we implemented a few years ago. And it's just a small example of, hey, we as a business actually care about our employees, and we want to make sure that they're treated really well. We invest a lot in them in terms of training courses, giving them time off to take those training courses if they wish as well. And in the end, it does pay off. It leads to lower churn on the customer side, and happier, more engaged, more productive employees. And maybe that's a good time to talk about it. You mentioned Paul Barber, our founder, earlier. This culture to me comes directly from him. He has always been very concerned with people and how they interact with the company or with him personally. I could share lots of different stories about how that's manifested over the years. This probably isn't the place. But yeah, Paul founded the business in 1987, grew it through lots of different forms over the years before eventually handing over the reins to Alok as COO a couple of years ago. And this is a story I'll tell in a bit, but our company had an ownership change about a year ago, actually almost exactly a year ago. And unfortunately, soon after that, we found out that Paul had been diagnosed with cancer. And actually, just last week, he succumbed to that and passed away. Very sad, obviously, and we want to carry on his legacy as a company. But it was interesting, and I'll tie it back to what I was saying about culture. At his funeral over the weekend, it was really interesting to see speakers from different parts of his life, from his family group, his friend group, even from Prophix. And everyone, bar none, was saying the same thing, that the way he cared about people was the most important thing about him. It was key to his life. It was key to who he was. And it resonated at Prophix. And it's really why I think we have such a strong culture today.
Well, that's a nice tribute. We hadn't heard that news, and Paul, I had the opportunity to interview on another podcast that I had in the past about middle market companies, and he was just clearly a dynamic leader, and just a wonderful, typical entrepreneurial founder in certain ways, but in other ways not. But just really a dynamic personality too. So we always like to ask for a finance strategic moment, and this is a moment of insight that you've experienced anywhere in your career. So it might have happened before Prophix. Somehow I doubt it. But it might have given your lines of sight and into the organization that you described with us over time, those different roles that you played. You saw something. You saw a risk. You saw an opportunity, and you responded to it. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, I think when I saw this question was coming, it was clear I was going to give one particular answer to this. I zeroed in on it right away. It's possibly not as specific of an answer as you would like, but I'll try and frame it that way. So that big strategic moment, or the strategic event that occurred, was on February 1st, 2021. So not that long ago, actually well into my career as CFO at Prophix. And that is the day that we transitioned control of our business from Paul, who we talked about, to a private equity company. So we had spent the last 12 months leading up to that date of February 1st, doing all of the things involved with putting the company up for sale and getting it actually sold. And it was a crazy, crazy year, of course. And that's maybe the topic for another podcast, to talk through how that actually went in that process that we went through, because it was extremely interesting to do it. But what happened after that is really the strategic moment. To me, as you heard, my background is mostly at Prophix and lots of different roles within the company. Now, suddenly I was thrust into a completely different world. It's very different having Paul and a bunch of friendly managers from Prophix asking questions. Now you have a private equity company sitting on the other end, and oh my God, that's going to be a big change, right? Turns out it was good. They're really good people. They're really nice to work with. However, the expectations are higher, and that requires a lot more work from a finance team and from a CFO as well. So what do I mean by that? Kind of cutting to the punchline here, but what this taught me is you have to really take ownership of things. It's very important for a CFO, certainly, to understand the numbers, to understand the narrative, and to build that and tell that story. But now there's an expectation to take that to the next level. If you really want to be a successful CFO at a growing company like this, you have to be able to interpret the numbers, figure out what the problems are, and solve them. You can't be the person that's sitting on the sidelines saying, hey, there's a problem over there. Now you're the VP of that department. Go ahead, solve it. I've pointed it out. That's my job. That's not enough anymore. You have to be able to really dig into the numbers in a lot more details. So to me, it's about breaking down those silos, identifying problems across the organization, getting your hands dirty, and leading the team to resolution. And man, that was a shock to the system, I would tell you. At Prophix, over the years, being bootstrapped and founder-led, the finance organization was underfunded intentionally for many, many years. It was a bare bones crew that was focused primarily on keeping the lights on. To go from that to having to build narratives and solve problems for the rest of the organization was a huge transition that we had to go through. And, I said it wasn't really a moment necessarily, but maybe a few moments coupled together where that realization hit me over the first few months working with our private equity partner, HG Capital, by the way, great company to work with. But yeah, that hit me over probably a month or two, and it's completely transformed the way I have to operate day to day. It changes the way I look at things. It changes the way I talk to other people in the organization and outside the organization as well. So I would say if I had to point to one thing, that would probably be the key strategic moment for me.
The business landscape is changing quickly. As the pressure to manage expenses efficiently and strategically increases, you need solutions that not only help drive down costs and improve efficiencies, but meet the changing needs of your business. At U.S. Bank, we can help. We'll work with you to uncover your specific payment challenges and bring you proactive and innovative solutions and strategies that help you meet the financial goals of your organization. Our commitment to doing the right thing for our customers has earned us the designation of one of the world's most ethical companies from the Ethisphere Institute for 6 years in a row. To learn more, visit us at usbpayment.com. We're going to jump to the mentoring round where I get to ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. So we have to go back, not to the very long ago. There was something you learned that first 30 days that you were handed that CFO title. And we know that only happened earlier this year, Ryan. But what is that piece of advice? If you could only turn back the clock to that first week, What's the piece of advice you'd give yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the first obvious thing for me is it would have been great to know that it was going to be a permanent role. When I started in this job, I thought it was going to be temporary. So I probably did operate that way for a time. So of course it would have been nice to know that. But I think it goes back to something I mentioned in the strategic moment as well. And it's really about taking ownership. Treat the business as if it's yourself, your business, I should say, and act accordingly. My job is not to tally up numbers and tell a story. It's to actually be involved in the business every single day from an operational perspective. I think it's so easy to get caught up and not really think about the world that way. You just want to get through the day, get through the month end, get through the audit, get through whatever step it is. But actually sitting back and focusing on the business and helping it as best you can, being of service to the business is critically important. And I don't think I understood that, to be fair, on day one.
This is the hardest question on the podcast when we ask you to reflect on the personal side. Finance leaders
Yeah.
just don't know themselves very well, I
Yeah.
suppose. But we're looking for a habit that you have or part of a daily routine, something that sets you apart,
Yeah.
perhaps from others. It might be something a family member would point out to us. Anything come to mind when we ask for a personal habit or daily routine that you have?
Yeah, there was a couple things I wanted to quickly touch on here, if that's okay. One of them for sure is the one that my wife or my family would point out and say, like, this guy's crazy. This is his thing. And it's about planning and organization. The reason my family would say that is, I'll give you an example. We take an annual vacation down south every year to one of those all-inclusive resorts. I now have a spreadsheet that I'm pretty sure includes every resort in Mexico, categorized, slice and dice it all over the place, every single detail. And you would think, hey, that's great. Now every year we decide where we want to go. We can just look at the spreadsheet and sort it and rank it, and that's fine. But no. I have to revise that spreadsheet every single year, add the new places, go look at new reviews, and just meticulously go through details. If we're going out to dinner one night, not at the resort, just on a random Friday at home, I'm all over it. I'm looking at where the places are, what kind of food do we want, what are the reviews, what time are we going to get there, what's the atmosphere going to be like, getting into super detailed things like that. And that, it drives my wife bonkers, but I think in business, it actually serves me pretty well. If you look at my week or my day or my year even, it's all very planned out. I have goals and things that I want to achieve every year, of course, but even down to the weekly kind of monthly level as well. It's all written down. I have it all kind of documented and track it over time. And there's not a day that I don't, at the end of my day or even before bed at night, if I haven't had a lot of time, where I don't look back at what I've done that day, look forward at what I have to do tomorrow. And then at the end of the week in particular, I have these written lists, handwritten, that I basically reset every Friday night so that I can prepare for what's to come the next week. So yeah, my family would say it's nuts, but I think it served me incredibly well and keeps me very organized and on the ball. The other thing I would say, if I could maybe add
But you might have had a
if I could just add a second one, maybe. I think it's really important. It's not necessarily a habit for me, but I think one really important thing for somebody in a CFO role in particular is to remember to stay humble, stay human, and be really learning centric. I think that has really served me well over the course of my career. I've never said, hey, I'm the CFO, like, I know what's going on, leave me alone. I've been 100% open to people that are senior to me, junior to me, colleagues from inside, outside, Prophix from everywhere. Just in terms of, I'm open. I want to hear different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking. I want to be challenged. And I want people to kind of see me as the type of person that they can do that with. Because a lot of times that's not the case. You're worried about talking to the CFO about whatever X, Y, and Z idea that I've had. But that's how I measure my team. I measure them on, are they proactively finding problems in the organization, because we're not perfect? And are they able to actually solve them? Are they bringing them up to me, and are we talking about them and getting them resolved? Which is something frankly, I see it a lot these days. It just doesn't happen at a lot of other companies.
Now, that's a sort of a cultural aspect of Prophix,
Yeah,
one would imagine.
absolutely.
What about a book? Would you have a book recommendation for us?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. Probably not a specific book, and I didn't want to just rhyme off a bunch of business books. The type of book that I like to read in particular is about physics. I love astrophysics in particular, so I read a lot of physics books. And the way I'll kind of tie it back to this is I find when I read those, it forces me to change my mindset on things completely because you're looking day to day at this spreadsheet and it's really granular, and then you're reading about astrophysics, let's say, and it's a much grander scale, much much longer in terms of time frames, much larger in terms of just size. And I think what it does for me is it forces me to think about things differently, whether it's shifting my focus from what's happening next week or next month or next year to a 10, 20, 50, 100,000 year scale. It lets me kind of focus on the future and really pulls me out of my day to day. One type of book or one author even that I would probably recommend. There's a lot of futurists out there and people that write about how things are going to be in the future. There's one author named I'm going to butcher his name, I'm sure, but his name is Michio Kaku, who writes about he's an astrophysicist, and he writes about what the world is going to be like over huge time frames, sometimes like millions of years into the future. But he makes it all really practical and does it in a kind of anecdotal way that's interesting to read. And it's not all math driven. It's all, really story driven. And I find every time I read one, it opens my eyes and gives me new ideas as to where things could be headed in the future.
Interesting selections for us. Thank you. We're up to our final question where we're going to ask you to look forward finally, just 12 months. What would you share with us what are your priorities as a finance leader for the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think as you've heard a little bit about, it's been a crazy kind of 12 to 24 months for Prophix and for a lot of the world as well. In addition to being acquired last year, we also did a major acquisition ourselves late in 2021. We also implemented an ERP as a business, so the finance organization underwent a major change. So I think the next 12 months for me is about building some stability on the team, giving people some comfort that it's not going to be constant change all of the time, but putting in place that foundation to allow Prophix to get to the next level and scale going forward. Because that's what we want to be doing as a business. We don't want to be, squeezing out every dollar of profit. We want to keep growing over time. And to do that, the back office has to be prepared and capable of keeping up with the pace.
Ryan Van Hatten, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack.
Hi, it's Jack. As promised, we wanted to share a segment from our interview with Paul Barber, the founder of Prophix, who sadly died earlier this month. I believe this is January 2019. The episode was released in January 2019. And if you're interested in the full episode, we'll feature it on Ryan Van Hatten's show notes page right below our interview with Ryan. We'll embed the interview with Paul as well. As always, thank you for listening.
Past 10 years or more, people have been saying that there's a lack of software development talent around. We have never had any problems recruiting people. I think if you go to Silicon Valley, where there are lots of startups, you do have problems recruiting people. But I think it also reflects on the corporate culture of your company. In a place like Silicon Valley, in many cases, the people you recruit don't stay very long. They might stay there for a couple of years and they move on somewhere else. But we've actually got developers in our company who have been here for like 15 or 20 years. And I think that I'd far sooner provide an environment which is stable and where people can develop personally with the company. And I don't mean just through the company itself, but in terms of promotions and more responsibility. I also mean in terms of the fact that we have many people here who, when they started, were not married, they were single, and during the time they've worked at Prophix Software, they've got married, they've had children, they've moved house and things like that to be close to the company. And I think that we're unusual as a software company. Most people think of software companies as being here today, gone tomorrow, but I don't think that's the kind of company we want to be. Well, I have been in this business for many, many years. As you pointed out, Prophix Software used to be a distributor, and we were distributing software way back in the days of mainframes. And so I've really been involved in corporate performance management software ever since then. In the old days with mainframes, it was mainly large companies, as you can imagine, but we were still using software to help them manage their business. And people often say, "What does CPM mean? What kind of applications are they?" It's things like budgeting, helping companies do planning. It's helping companies do financial reporting, helping companies do things like analyzing their business numbers, doing consolidations if you have multiple legal entities and things like that. That's the kind of business that we're in, and I personally have been doing this for, way too long probably, but everything's changed over the years. Years ago, we were selling mainly to large companies. Nowadays, Prophix sells our software to mid-market companies in the main.
And when did that, was Prophix first conceived to serve mid-market companies, or was it something you discovered along the way?
It's something we discovered. We realized that we had to change. We're in Canada, and we were a distributor of software, and when the NAFTA came along, North American Free Trade Agreement, it became obvious that being a distributor in Canada didn't make sense because so many companies were able to sell over the border. So we decided to become a developer of software. Originally, we sold to large companies, but we found that, although we were quite successful there, we found that it wasn't a great market for us. We didn't have the financial backing to really do it very well. Our competitors did a lot better than us. We then changed direction totally and started selling to really small companies. And it's a bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. We tried the big guys, we tried the small guys, and now we're in the mid-market, and that's a place where we really like to be.